all to our December board meeting of the Utah State Charter School Board. Today is December 14th. It's now 10:04, so I'm admitting I'm starting late. I always like to start on time. Here we are. And we have some business to conduct today and some business getting to know each other better beyond that, and that's a good thing. We'll begin our meeting today as we have our full board here today, and also welcome AAG Olson and Deputy Superintendent Stallings as well, who's just come in. We are fortunate to have such good support as well. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Member Cisneros will lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you so very much. I'm not suspecting, because I don't see anyone that, unless they're one of this team who want to make public comment today, I'm suspecting we don't have any public comment today. All right. So we will go past that piece. And the nice thing then, I get to have a little report. And I thought about what I might talk about today. And actually, I'm going to kind of do thought report more than just report. So on the screen, well, this screen is working, and back here as well, you can see the start of this PowerPoint I want to share. And that doesn't mean, oh, you have to buckle your seatbelts because it's going to take a long time. I promise it's just because I want you to see some of the visual pieces, and that's the whole reason I did it. And thank you guys for making sure that works so we could get it up on the screen. So this little bit, I thought end of a year, a calendar year, those schools often work July 1 to July 1. We still, all of us, this is an end of a calendar year. It's a good time to reflect on what's happened during this past calendar year. And we've had among our team a really amazing calendar year. We've had some, a really nice 2023. And as you're thinking about going into 2024, and we set sometimes New Year's resolutions and talk about what are we going to do in the new year, what would we like to do? And so I'm going to talk about the notion of, could that be for all of our schools, all of us, not thinking we have to move miles away, but just a little bit of just continuous quality improvement. We're just moving forward a little bit. I don't know if you know this man, any of you. This is why I needed to have the pictures. But Charles Daniels, anyone know Charles Daniels? If you look at him immediately, at his time in the U.S., he was famous. He was really well known because he was the first American to win a swimming medal in the Olympics. You can tell by his tall stature. He looks like a swimmer, but he was the first one. The U.S. didn't really have swimming medals prior. And that's 1904, he set the Olympic record for the 220-yard freestyle then. We now have a 200-meter freestyle, but 220-yard freestyle, he set the Olympic record. His time was 2 minutes, 44.2 seconds. And he was very well known. The kind of ticker tape parades and cheering for this national hero who had, in swimming, accomplished an Olympic medal. We have the Olympics coming up again this summer in Paris. This summer, I don't think is a really good time to travel to Paris unless you have tickets to Olympic events, maybe. But they're really gearing up, and I heard they're painting the Eiffel Tower gold and other things, so it should be beautiful. And a lot of the events, like the swimming events, are going to be held in the Seine. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. But we were Tokyo prior, in China prior. I'm going to go way back to 2008 now. In Beijing, 888, you remember that day specifically chosen by the People's Republic of China to hold that event. And we really watched the swimming event in that time because of Michael Phelps. We were very interested to see how Michael Phelps would do. And Michael Phelps had a journey towards continuous quality improvement. He really wanted to win the Olympic gold in the 200-meter freestyle. That's a picture of him with his mother. I'll tell you about her in a minute too. But he had very clear goals. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to win. So because Ian Thorpe, a wonderful swimmer as well from Australia, had won in Greece the Olympics before, and he really wanted to beat Ian Thorpe. Ian Thorpe's time was 1 minute 44.7 seconds, and Michael Phelps had swum that race 1:45.32. So he knew he had to improve. I mean, amazing. That's less than a second, but he's working to improve that much just to get move that much faster, and knowing that everyone is going to be improving in the meantime too. And it's just little bit by little bit, as they're figuring out what to do. So his coach, of course, Bob Bauman, who worked with him continuously to work to do that. So at that 200-meter freestyle, he did set a world record prior to the Olympics on March 27th of 2007 of 1:43.86. He had surpassed his goal. And that just means improving your stroke, improving your turn, improving your takeoff I guess that's what they call it, do they? As they hit the water, and it's what they wear. The pools, they say, have different speeds. I'm going to be very interested to see the speed of the Seine this coming summer, if that's true. But then on August 12th, 2008, in Beijing, he set an Olympic record of 1 minute 42.96 seconds and won the Olympic gold. So it was just that little bit of time, little bit over time. I'm going to tell you, Michael Phelps's swimming gold is not much different from Debbie Phelps' education gold. She's an elementary school principal in Baltimore County, Maryland, and I had a chance to visit her school, where every child has a data book. They track their own data. They say, this is where I am, this is what I'm improving, this is where I want to be. They set goals in her school, and they can tell you exactly, this is where I am, this is where I want to be, this is what I'm working on, and they follow just continuous quality improvement because they know the goal and they know where they want to be. So our work is done one by one child at a time, one at a time, like those data books. We work one by one. That's why I always I prefer, instead of saying we know all children can learn, we say I know each child can learn, because each one needs a different approach often. So that journey of Olympic gold, continuous improvement, same thing we're going to be doing in education, that we should be doing as we set our goals for the new year. I encourage all of us to think about, what's a little incremental change? How can I improve that stroke or that turn? What am I going to do just to get to be a second or two faster? How am I going to just move this a little bit further? And you should know, Paul Biederman in July of 2009 in Rome actually set a new goal, 1 minute 42 seconds, just less than a second faster than Michael Phelps's record. So Charles Daniels, in 1904, his Olympic record was 2 minutes 44.2 seconds. And in a little over 100 years, everyone just making slight improvements a little bit at a time. improve that now to 1 minute, 42 seconds. I mean, a full minute, a little over 2 seconds faster. Paul Biederman could have gotten out of the pool and dried and dressed almost before Charles Daniels finished his Olympic gold medal swim. But it's not huge incremental changes. It's just a little bit at a time. We continue to work to try to improve. So that's what I encourage us to do, to work towards just continuous quality improvement, just a little bit at a time. What am I going to do just incrementally to move forward instead of saying, oh, the task is too big and giving up, but just a little bit at a time to move forward. So that's my message today. As you consider your year and know how successful, what a great successful year we've had, and as you think about the new year, what are the little incremental changes you might make in continuous quality improvement, like mine pushing the sugar away and the white flour away, some things like that, just trying to improve it just a little bit every day. So there's the message. And that's kind of what we do, I think, as educators, and we all are doing in our schools, and we see it. And I know we're going to hear reports of how we've looked at some of that with our schools this year, and that they're continuing to do that. So there's my message. And I'll turn the time to Dr. Kramer. Yeah.
Thank you so much. What an inspiring way to start our board meeting is with that message, and with that continuous improvement message. It's practical and it's also heartfelt, and so we really appreciate that. And so with our time on this agenda at this time, I'd just like to provide an executive director report, and our associate executive director, Marie, will also be chiming in and adding to, and it'll be a bit of a co-presentation of sorts. It's short because we have some fun things to do today. It's a little bit different day for us, with definitely some work to do. So it's brief, but I think it's important. So I appreciate your time. So just kind of walk through some of the different things that are going on. So one of the things that we've been doing is collaborating effectively with the Utah State Board of Education, the charter associations, and the legislature. And I think that this is called out very clearly in the board's strategic plan. And I got to tell you, as a new executive director, as a new leadership team, that we are so grateful that the board put the hard work to create that strategic plan. It guides everything that we do. And in that, one of the priorities that was called out was to do this first bullet point right here, is to do this collaboration with these different groups. And we're pleased that we're plugged into meetings with the Utah State Board of Education. They've been extremely helpful and supportive as we continuously learn to steal from the beginning, the continuous improvement, and that's much appreciated. Working with the association, that is the Charter Association and the Charter Network Group, has been just exhilarating work. Having those meetings with the leaders and with the people in those organizations has been outstanding. They give some really great advice, like one of your priorities as the new executive director is to go into the schools. The same advice that board leadership has given. Nobody gave a directive, but they just gave the advice that it'd be really good if you get into the schools, if you listen and if you learn from the schools. And that's something that they said, and we'll turn to that in the presentation of the executive director's report later. One actionable thing that happened as that collaboration is a podcast with the Charter Association. It didn't come out quite yet because I believe that this podcast episode will also include some of Associate Executive Director Marie Stephenson's words, but it was a fun opportunity and a real opportunity for me to introduce myself as a professional and as a servant of Utah and of the work that the board here does. And so it's a real good opportunity, hopefully cheery, and we talk a lot about being a supportive authorizer. Everybody that we talk with, we talk about not just being an authorizer, but doing it in a supportive way. I think one of the highlights of that particular podcast, though, you may tune in and out, and that's okay, to my answers, but there'll be a link to the board strategic plan, and I called that out as being super important to the work that we do. And that's how we work with legislatures. We just interact a little bit or see what they do, or with the Utah State Board of Education or the association and the network, as we do it according to the strategic plan. We've also really started forming some productive partnerships with authorized schools. And we've done that by making personal visits. There's been some texting, some emails, and some phone calls. And as you can imagine, we can't meet all the schools in the first month. We do think in the first year of our working together that we'll be able to visit personally every single school. And these visits are a tremendous opportunity to listen, to learn, to offer up our support, to ask questions, and it's an exchange. And I think that that's what a partnership is a true exchange of ideas, of compliance that's needed. Sometimes we do need to underscore deadlines or different compliance matters, but that happens in a supportive way. We've done it just by going into the schools, touring, talking, introducing ourselves. We've done it together, sometimes myself alone, and that's been one of the strategic initiatives that we've taken on, is those visits. We look forward to developing some customized performance measures and embedded in the bilateral charter school agreement. These are words right out of the strategic plan, so you probably are familiar with it. But how we're doing that is by working with the National Charter School Institute. We've had members of our team that have taken on some sessions with them to learn what would be a good direction to go. And there are some wonderful directions that we can go. And I think that our customized performance measures is likely going to be one of those outcomes. Those are some strategic initiatives. Next steps and priorities, some things that we've been working on for continuous improvement. We've clarified the roles and responsibilities of several of our staff members and just had those great conversations, giving them feedback and them giving us feedback. And that's been really good to establish some feedback loops so that we can know how we can best lead the staff to carrying out the board's work. And also just opportunities where people are reporting on their areas of expertise and on their job functions. So there's accountability with our work. What have you been able to accomplish in the last week, 2 weeks? And how can we further support you in the work that you do? And that's been a real priority for us. We also are extremely excited, as announced at the last board meeting, to post for a charter school strategic growth and innovation specialist. And that post is nearly done, and we hope to get some great qualified applicants in so that we can fill that position. We also continue to look at how can we just refine, not change necessarily, but how can we refine in small measurable ways the way that we do our authorizing. And we do comprehensive review structures, as you know, and we also do annual reviews. But this indicators distress, this last bullet point here, is one value add that we see that we can add, and it came from our work or our conversations with the National Charter School Institute. And so we're excited about being able to look together with schools about some areas that they can improve and what are some things that are perhaps distressing, and so we're super excited about that as it relates with our authorizing work. And then also just we believe that 90-day planning is important. So as a team, we're going to go through a book study. Few props, but one is just, this book, Traction, is for organizations. We won't use the entire book, but it does provide some really great clarity around how to establish ROCs, which are goals, And we'll do that in 90-day increments. And that gives us an orderly way to establish some smart rocks, is what we're going to call them, which are really goals and priorities that we can set, and then you can see us accomplish. They'll be aligned, of course, with the strategic plan. So we're starting to roll that out as well. The two quotes, the last time we quoted Gino Wickman, it was liked. It had to do with issues and are like mushrooms. So I put two more up here. And I think one is that we are on a diamond mine with this work that we do. Absolutely, just the innovation that we're seeing in the schools, the student achievement that we're starting to hear, that I'm starting to learn about in the state. We are absolutely on a diamond mine. We just got to stay focused on our goals. We got to stay focused on continuous improvement, and those are our priorities. Setting those goals and then showing our achievement of those goals. So one of the things that we believe is going to help move the board forward and us as we serve the board is taking a look at our committees. And committee work is an outstanding place to do the nitty-gritty, kind of get into some committee work. You can really roll up the sleeves and get to work. Not that we don't work in these meetings, but outside of the meetings, those committees provide some opportunities for us. And we've been looking at that as a staff, as leaders, as to how can we continuously improve in this area. We do have a finance committee, but can we meet on a quarterly basis that aligns with our 90-day plan? It kind of aligns with financial ways that financial organizations do work on a quarterly basis. And so we'll just take a look at our committees, and can we just reestablish and reset what the committee work is? And that would be for you to consider as board leadership and as a board is, do we form additional committees? These are only ideas. But perhaps there's some committees that could be formed that align with the strategic plan. And again, the ideas are just maybe innovation could be a key committee. And I could see the work of those 2 or 3 committee members that just bring back what they worked on and report that back. And then there's a board. And appreciate Vice Chair Phillips just kind of planting this idea with us a little bit. We took it and continue to run with it. We believe that this could be a really good initiative, is reevaluating our committees and then reestablishing that work, maybe even forming a committee 2 or more. No action today, just putting it out there, planting the seed for perhaps some future work. Now, the most exciting part of this executive director report, we thought it'd be really good. We may not be able to do this all the time with all schools, but we were eager to get into the schools and visit with school leadership. And so thank you for allowing us to just kind of highlight some of these first few visits, because they've been invigorating and very inspiring. So that's what Marie and I will do next, is just kind of highlight 1 or 2 things from some of our school visits and then showcase some of the schools we're going into next. So the first one here, I think you're going to launch us, Marie, and then I'll kind of close off this one.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. We first wanted to start off with Itinerus Early College High School and share just some statistics there at the top. Itinerus receives $3.5 million annually in scholarships for their students. They have a 3+ as their average points over the state on their ACT scores. They are running a 98% high school graduation rate. 99% is their post-secondary readiness score. They are very below their state average at 1 to 115 is their student to counselor ratio. They have 30 concurrent enrollment courses that are offered on campus. And those last 2 I think are so fun. All of these are great statistics, but especially they are number 8 right now on the U.S. News top 10 in Utah, and they've been there for 10 plus years. So definitely one of our top high schools in the state. And then they outperformed the state in ELA, math, and science. So one of our number one schools. So one of our best and brightest. Exciting to start out with them for a visit.
Thank you for the invitation to come there, Member Cisneros. Last meeting, you said, hey, come out to our school. And I came out right away, and it was so inspiring. For what you just heard, some of the things that I saw, just so you're aware, is there's STEM everywhere, right? It's a school that has a lot of STEM. But in one particular class, and it happened to be the class that you were teaching, 100% engagement from the students with pencils and pens up. So you're in the middle of a highly innovative STEM school, and in this class, we had 100% engagement. You could see it, right? Everybody's furiously taking notes. And that was amazing. That was so just a breath of fresh air to see that level of engagement and to be doing work that's tactile, and it's just, they're going back old school. And that was an important part of that particular lesson because it is associated with note-taking in college and beyond and those things. That's a brag moment that I had. And I also know that ninth grade class is in the process of writing an 8 to 10 page collage action plan as their final. And they started this in August with no idea what MLA even was. And so that's an outstanding thing. And so we appreciate the invitation. That was the first school that we had a chance to go to. And we're just wanting to highlight a few more. So thanks for giving us this opportunity. We'll go Early Light Academy. Early Light Academy is one of those schools where you go in and it feels like a light. It absolutely feels like a light because everybody is full of joy. The students are interacting with one another, and it's clearly obvious that everyone has joy, and it is a truly lightful place to be. On this particular day, they announced that they had a $500,000 safety grant that was awarded to them to help with safety infrastructure. What an achievement for that school. And for me to be there on that day when they got it, there was just high fives all around to get that resource in. And that takes hard work, grant writing and things of that nature. Also walked into a highly innovative classroom. It was called Launch. And in this particular classroom, they launch big ideas, and they walk through it using the scientific method and other ways. They invited our board to use their launch room because it's outfitted. Like, you take this idea, you collaborate this idea, and it gets launched. And I could tell you, when I use the word invigorated, I think that was where I sat in that room and listened and saw some of the things going on there. But what a bright light in our portfolio of schools. There's a second school. This Hawthorne Academy, really and all the schools had an opportunity, not all, but many, to sit down with a board member, leadership, sometimes staff members. And so it was a nice opportunity for exchange. At Hawthorne, we sat down for a while, and it didn't take long, and they walked me out to this big wheel on the wall. And it was a wheel that you would spin, and when you spin it, you are assigned a house, kind of like a Harry Potter house. But it wasn't just spinning the wheel that I did, but it was the kindergarten class that was cheering me on. And they're saying, you can do it, and you're going to be Amistad, or you're going to be, I know what you're going to be. This is what I was. I was Amistad. That's what the wheel revealed, is that they say. But this school's priority right now is to get their culture right and to get it sound. And they have a culture where everybody is tied into this house and the assignment of the house. It builds team, it builds relationships, and it builds really amazing things. It was studied by the school prior to them doing it, and it's a fun thing that's built into the fiber of who they are. They believe that once they get the culture completely squared away with a tool like a wheel on the wall and getting a t-shirt, that they're going to improve their academic achievement. And I can't wait to watch it improve because I believe after that visit that they were going the right way with culture. It's a great visit that day. North Star Academy. And with North Star Academy, just you can lay out one fact just right from the very beginning. They got a huge wait list, right? So if you look at that verbiage right in the center of the picture of the wonderful children around, it says that they applied for all grade levels this year. There's 586 students on the wait list. What a stark reality, just amazing, right? That shows demand for a school, and they have demand for the school because of their academic achievement. They're doing really well academically, and people are really trying to get into the school, and they will get into the school through a fair and equitable lottery process. Those that are, and so I was really compelled to share that with you, that there's a tremendous demand for that school, and you could tell why. And one of the reasons why is that they have clusters, and that's what these pictures are, is that as you go from one class to another, they have some extracurricular different things that are going on beyond math and beyond science and ELA. And these clusters provide opportunities for them to do. You can see around the tables here that they're working on some woodworking projects. There's a chess club. There's different beauty clubs. There's different things, and these clusters are owned by the teachers as part of what they do. That's built into their mission, that they do these clusters. Bird watching, I would have taken that one. That's becoming a real great pastime and hobby for young and adult, older alike now. So there was these really cool clusters. So that was North Star Academy. All were great visits. So Excelsior, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, at Excelsior Academy, we at this school were able to sit down with the leadership team as well as the board chair. We have them pictured here, and really just engage in a deep conversation. And it was really exciting to be able to talk about the data that they have at their school. They are a school that does a tremendous job at collecting large amounts of data, but then using it in meaningful ways. And so they were able to talk about all the ways that they use that data to guide their instruction and to make meaningful improvements for their students and to inform their teachers and inform their practices at their school. They also were able to then use that data to identify different needs in the area and to then to be able to share that with us as the authorizer, to talk about, what does that look like for authorizing in the future and what sort of needs could benefit the area as a whole. And I think that was a really exciting conversation for us to be part of. They also were able to speak about collaboration efforts that they've had with both the other charter schools in the area as well as the district. And again, that was driven by data and by responding to community needs, responding to the needs of the other schools in the area, responding to their parents. And it was really just a wonderful, deep conversation that really revolved around how this school is listening to their community and then trying to be that partner that leads out in providing what the community is asking for.
Really good. At Bonneville, we really had an opportunity to interact with board chair, a new academic director. In this particular visit, we felt that our partnership and the trust that we were building paid some dividends because they talked through some opportunities, challenges that they have, and we were able to provide some guidance and support and some ideas. And one is just leadership. It's hard to find quality leaders in the schools, and they've had a few changes. And so they were transparent and open about it, and we really enjoyed that honest exchange, and it was a great visit that day.
Completing our Tooele County tour, we also got to visit Scholar Academy, and this was another exciting one, and they were able to really speak to their community partnerships. And they had both their school leadership team as well as their board chair there as well. And they were speaking about how they've really partnered up with both their mayor and their town council out there in Tooele, as well as with their police force, to really make sure that they have robust partners within their community. And so we drew some pictures here that show a recognition award that they received from the mayor. They had an officer that came and was able to do a big presentation for the students that wrapped up a safety week. And they spoke about how they are able to engage with these partners, not just with their students, but then also for professional learning, and with their board, and making sure that they have a safe school and a school that they feel is an active part of the Tooele City community as well. Oh, and then this one's me as well. Rounding out our tour, we were also able to visit Beehive Academy of Science and Technology. And this was a great one. As you know, they moved from their original campus to their new campus and have their elementary running now too. So it's a full K-12 that's operating. And we got to have a wonderful tour, and Director Oguz is so proud of his school, and they have so many awards and accomplishments, and it's always exciting to visit with him. We really enjoyed getting to see this display that they have in the hallway and talking about the diversity that they have at their school. I did just send to your emails right as our meeting was starting a diversity report that came out from Beehive. And so if that's something at some point you want to take a look at, it was something they were really proud of, sharing about how many cultures and languages and different student backgrounds are represented at their school, both within their student body, but then also in their staff. And that's something that they've really worked to make sure that they are standing undivided, and that they speak about making the world a better place. We loved seeing each of their hallways represented a different scientist from various communities, and giving students that opportunity to learn about scientists from around the world. And it was just a very enjoyable visit, getting to hear about their many accomplishments. Also, in your sign-in sheet today, there is a number of handouts about their upcoming STEM Expo. And so that's there for you to look at as well. If you'd like to attend or look at, other opportunities to participate with Beehive, all of that information is there for you as well. And we just very much enjoyed getting to hear about the great accomplishments of this charter school.
Absolutely, and we also learned of their partnership with the Charter School Growth Fund and some other things. So really appreciate that we won't be able to do this for all the schools, but we wanted to give you an idea of the work that we've started and that we'll continue to do this year, is to visit with schools, to tour, and to do this type of work to build relationships. We've been privileged to do it, and we thought it important to just report out our early work in this area. And then we have some future scheduled visits already, and appreciate all the busy leaders that are scheduling with us for that, so you can see some of those. And then as we close out, we will provide in the Executive Director Report in the future some enrollment data, some quantitative data, some academic data. That could come out in an annual report that we're working on. It may actually, or is morphing into a 20 years of the board's work, because we're coming upon that milestone. And so that's something that you can look forward to in future executive director reports, is some numbers behind some of these stories as well, both in the annual part of the report, the 20-year report that we're working on, and I think that would conclude the executive director's report. So thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of it's driving to each of those places and spending time with folks and making sure you're making those connections. Good for all of us to hear those reports. Thank you so much. Gives us things to talk about that the schools are doing and helps to connect all those schools. So thank you for making that effort to do that. That is time well spent. I say to my students who are becoming principals, never will I ever come to your school and see you sitting in your office. Don't do it. If you do, I will be really upset with you. So you need to be out cruising the highway out looking at what's going on in the school, and that's exactly what you're doing, cruising the highway literally, but also cruising the highway of the schools and seeing how they're doing. And to know that firsthand is really time well spent. So thank you so much. All right, let's go to, and plus you're getting to see the state. What a way for Dr. Kramer to know about Utah, right? So there we go.
Without any snow yet.
It'll come. Not to worry. It'll come. It'll come. We're still actually officially in fall for a couple more days anyway, right? So, all right. Our next agenda item is a consent calendar. If you've had a chance to look at that, do I have a motion relative to the consent calendar? Member Cisneros.
Chair, if I could make a motion to remove 2 items from the consent calendar. I'd like to make a motion to remove item C, the continuation of waiver for itinerant early college high school, so that it removes the conflict for me. And then if I also could remove item F, startup grant for American Principals Academy, please.
All right. So 2 items we will consider separately, each of those items separately. The motion is to pull those 2. A second to that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Member Smith. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, and that I'll rule that passes. And so let's consider the rest of the agenda items, and then we'll come back to the 2 that we've just pulled. So for the rest, a motion for the rest of the agenda items.
Yeah, I move that we approve the remaining items on the consent calendar.
Thank you. Motion from Member Olson to approve the remaining items. A second to that motion.
I will also second that motion.
Member Smith, thank you so much. All those in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I didn't ask if there's any discussion, but if so, make yourself known, but I think not since we passed. Let's go back to those 2 items that we've pulled. The first is the item relative to itinerants, and we know that Member Cisneros will now recuse herself from that vote. Do I have a motion relative to that item?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and move that the board provides a favorable recommendation of the continued waiver that Itinerus intends to prepare to present to USBE from board rule as listed on the consent agenda.
All right, so motion to approve the waiver, a second to that,
I second that motion.
and a second from Vice Chair Phillips. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that passes.
Chair?
Yes.
It'd be good to note that board
That Member
member
Cisneros
Cisneros
abstained.
abstained. Right.
Thank you so much. Member Cisneros did abstain, but I think the rest of us all voted in favor. Thank you so much. Now we'll do the same thing now with the other item that we pulled. Do I have a motion? You're looking for the motion, maybe. Yeah. I suspect that doesn't mean you want it just to die on the table, but I think that's because you're looking for the right motion to make. And since you're not abstaining, Member Cisneros, maybe you could, because you had it up.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the startup grant for American Principals Academy as outlined in the backup.
All right. So a motion to approve the startup grant for American Principals Academy. A second to that motion.
I'll second that.
And Member Bassett seconds. Thank you, Member Cisneros' motion. And the second from Member Bassett. Any discussion about that item?
Chair, I'll just mention that I'm abstaining from the vote on that item.
Thank you. So we will note that Member Olson has abstained from that, will abstain from that vote. The rest of you, if you're ready to vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. All in favor with the abstention, though, from Member Olson. All right. That completes our initial calendar, our consent calendar. We're ready to move to our first action item. and it is Ms. Stephenson will talk to us about our updated language for our small expansion process so that we're in line with new updated language of our 277552.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair Bowles. This is a pretty quick update for everyone, but just wanting to close our loop and make sure that we take things back to USBE as we had promised to do, and being true to our value of transparency that we have as a authorizer. As you can see here, I pulled up the small expansion application, and I think this is the place that we see it most clearly, and then I can kind of speak through the small changes that have taken place and what we're proposing here. Just for that background, when we took our small expansion process to the USBE back this fall. There was that discussion in the Law and Licensing Committee about wanting to make some adjustments to the definition. And we reminded them that that ultimately lived with them, but if they wanted to do that, we would, support that, and then we would update our process as well, pending that going into effect, and that we would hope they would put it through so that we could get our small expansions approved prior to that October 1 deadline, which they did, and then that they would update their language and that we would bring our new process through with updated language as well. And so working together, all of that has occurred. And you can see here it affected our 277550 as well as our 277552. 552 went into effect with the updated language in October, and 550 went into effect in November. So this is our first opportunity for that. The things that have changed were that the definition moved from being 50 or fewer students to being 50 to 100 students. And so our definition here on the application has changed to reflect that it is a request for between 50 to 100 students for a small expansion. The other things that changed, these were recommendations from the committee, the Law and Licensing Committee of the USBE, that we at the time said, we will make that proposal to our board. And so that's what's coming before you today. Prior, we had signatures from all board members on our application. We are proposing to you that it would just be a signature from the board chair and the school director to be able to turn in that application. We also had where, of course, we would note if there were any corrective action plans, turnaround, warning, system of support. And we had in our process that would make it so they were unable to apply. The committee of the Law and Licensing recommended that we can still note that, but that perhaps our board would still want to hear from the school. And so what we are proposing is that this would be for informational use. Staff would still include that information for you, but then that would be up to you as the board of if you would still want to hear from this school and make that decision if you would like to approve that small expansion for them. So those would be the three changes that you would see in the application. Those are then reflected in our policy that we've just updated that definition, and then in our process, just outlining that we've updated the definition and that we will provide a notation of any of those conditions existing, but that it does not automatically remove someone from being able to apply. And then again, as noted, just that it's only the board chair and school director that would need to sign off on the request. Obviously, we would hope that would be a whole school discussion, and that would be something with the governing board that you could discuss with them as well. So that is what's being proposed. And then just to speak to the process, if that's something that you would approve today, then that will go back to Law and Licensing to approve for our process to be able to use this new updated process and forms for next year when we hear these in August. Or if you would like us to make further adjustments, of course, we're happy to do that and bring that back to the board at a later date.
Thank you so much. Anyone have questions for Ms. Stephenson as we begin? Go ahead.
I'm actually curious for both staff and board's feelings on the feedback regarding what had my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this understanding, but part of the rule change was to make a little bit of an administrative line for applications we would hear under a theory of why are we bringing expansions for schools that need to tighten up and clean house, and kind of as a bright line in the rule to say don't bother with an application if you need to fix some things, right? So tighten up before you come. And so I'm curious about why that's getting rolled back, and I'm just curious about other board members and staff's feeling on that feedback.
Thank you so much, Member Cisneros. Do you want to respond first, Ms. Stephenson, and then I see Vice Chair Phillips would like to respond too.
I'm happy to respond. I believe that is what was in the rule prior, and we did have a number that we have administratively denied in the past, and that the change in the rule did remove some of that language and gave more flexibility. We as staff, when we put it forward before, had left that in there, feeling like that had been working for our team. And I think because the rule had changed to give more flexibility at this point, that was my understanding, where they had said, perhaps your board will also want more flexibility.
Vice Chair Phillips may want to give, she's been in meetings with this has been discussed.
Yes, in fact, with Associate Director Stephenson. So we also thought that that was a fairly bright line. When we went to the Law and Licensing Committee, the general view of the members of that committee, led by Member Hymas, Chair Hymas of that committee, was that, and it was rather unanimous. I can't remember anyone who dissented from this viewpoint, was that these are such small changes to a school, and often are very much about aligning with the desires of the parents in that school, or the configuration of the building, or the alignment with the district as the district changes its configuration of high schools and junior highs, middle schools and high schools, that having it be as prescriptive, having it mimic the large expansion and satellite was too inflexible, they felt, the Law and Licensing Committee. So because of the sort of very modest nature of these requests, the Law and Licensing Committee wanted us to come back and actually broaden the number, the types and requests that we would consider, including not being prescriptive about some of these other things that would in fact be barriers for large expansion and satellite, and still are in the application process. They felt it was too prescriptive and unnecessary for these teeny requests.
Thank you, Vice Chair Phillips. Ms. Stephenson wants to add.
If I may add one additional thing, one other piece that had come out of that as well was that sometimes, like a school that is struggling with enrollment, perhaps adding an additional grade, not necessarily adding additional students, or some of the things that this request could help with, may actually be an answer to addressing some of those concerns as well. And so I think, speaking to the point that you brought up, that sometimes this request could actually help with a problem that is identified.
Thank you. Let's go to a motion, and then if we have additional discussion, we can. So, someone like to make a motion relative to this change of language?
I'd like to move that we approve. Are we just approving the one policy and do them one by one?
Just this updated language to our small expansion process.
I'd like to approve or adopt the proposed changes to the small expansion application.
All right. A motion from Member Smith to approve the language changes to our small expansion process. Do I have a second to that motion?
Just to clarify, you said the process, I think she said the application. Are we only approving at this point the application itself? Or are we approving the application, the policy, and the procedure? That's what I thought. You said the process. I just want to make sure we're clear on what the motion
Ms.
is.
Stephenson, help to, so that I'm saying it correctly then. Will you? Yeah, I said language because it's part of the process.
application process.
The application is part of the process, so
Yeah, I think we could do it either way.
we're not,
I think it just needs to be clear what the motion is.
Right.
If it's for the application, which is what I had heard, and then it changed to process, I think it just needs to be clear. And if the application is part of that process, then make that understood.
okay. So you said application. All right, so the motion was application. Let's stay there. We know that by changing the application, it adjusts the process. We'll stay with the language of a change in the application for small expansion. Thank you. And I suspect that's what you were seconding. Someone will now potentially second that motion to the change of the application.
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you for the clarification and for the second to that motion. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of the change to the small expansion application, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. Thank you all so much for that. Now, our next item is a discussion item that Vice Chair Phillips.
Chair,
Yes.
excuse me. I believe we'll also then want to do the policy and the procedure so that it is the full process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. So help me to know what it is that you need us to take action on relative to, so that,
We need an motion to adopt the expansion policy and the expansion procedure separately.
okay. All right. Okay. And we needed to do those each separately. Okay. So now we need a motion to approve the process and the policy and the procedure. All right, policy and procedure. Do we have a motion relative to that?
I would like to move that we adopt the updated small expansion policy.
I'll second that.
All right. So a motion to adopt the small expansion policy. And we have a second. We did have a second to that motion, and a second from Vice Chair Phillips. Further discussion? Seeing none.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Yeah, please.
I don't mean to slow this down. The only comment that I have, and maybe it's a question, maybe it's a comment, I'm just not really sure. The policy doesn't lay out it doesn't necessarily lay out any standards for us to consider in approving an application. I don't know that that's a problem, but as I compare that to the procedure, and I don't know if this goes to Member Cisneros' point or not. When you get to the procedure, it lays out a flagging process for staff to note if certain conditions exist, such as a corrective action plan. But the policy doesn't really explain whether we're to consider that or whether that's important or anything like that. I don't know if that's a problem or not. I just wanted to note it. I think the policy's fine, and frankly, I think the procedure's fine. I'm just not sure if we should be building in any standards or if this is just purely 100% discretionary for the board to consider an application, whether it's yay or nay.
I think in line with what Vice Chair Phillips explained earlier, we'd like to preserve flexibility for these small expansion requests. And so while we will, in fact, as a matter of routine, consider, and that's why we have the procedure in place to flag certain kinds of potential issues with an application, we don't want to tie our own hands by doing that. Yeah,
That makes sense to me.
To provide the flexibility we talked about. Member Cisneros.
Thank you for bringing that up, Member Olson, because that was kind of my concern from before. I think the larger community on both USPE and charter side was the flexibility thus results in inconsistent votes and inconsistency in how we approach schools. And in one particular year, there was a bunch of expansions, and everybody's comment was, well, you can be academically mediocre, but as long as your finances are in line, you get approved. And so I think in thinking through our values and what we say we value as a board, I think too much flexibility removes from us standards that we want to hold ourselves in the schools to. Then it becomes very subjective as to how we approve. And so I think too much flexibility can create its own problem that this rule was trying to solve historically. And so rolling this back too far, I think we're just going to find ourselves right back in the problem we were before, which is why I was curious if staff feels the same or if I'm just being ultra paranoid.
Member Smith.
I would like to point out that there, in this particular instance, is good reason to preserve flexibility for ourselves because it is likely to be, it is likely that having the flexibility to, for example, change a grade level banding would be a solution to a school that was experiencing certain kinds of difficulties, right? Or having the ability to add a small number of students, but not a huge number, where that could help a school that was struggling to build a community, right? I agree with your sentiment, and I was right there with you when we were approving schools that made me think, right? Just because they met the check boxes, and maybe denying some schools because they were administratively denied. And so I think that we are capable of judicious use of that. And as a board, we are capable of using considerations without being handcuffed to the policy.
Vice Chair Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with what Member Smith has stated, but I also want to look at the practical side of it. We've had a process whereby we considered satellites, large expansions, and small expansions as one bundled group of decisions and applied the same criteria to all of these. It was rather disastrous. Some of the large expansions that you're referring to that we approved in the past may or may not have been ill-advised. We had back and forth with USBE about that, and we had even very robust discussions on our board about those. Those were all large expansions, and I want to point out that the criteria for those has not changed. We will continue to sort of be prescriptive. Those schools that are on a cap aren't probably going to be looked at. In fact, I think that is already a disqualification. So for a large expansion or satellite, you still have to meet that very, very strict criteria that we've had in the past because USBE rule has not changed in that regard. But what we found is that it put us in a position, for instance, when an arts academy from Southern Utah came to us and was in fact needy of a very small change to its grade configuration and number of students. It would have not only been very helpful for the school, but nothing about that school. The request was modest enough that even if there were a few concerns we had with the school, they were really not. I don't think any of us, as we discussed that day, felt that the request should have been denied had there been a different process, had there been different criteria by which we could have considered that school. It just simply wasn't a big enough ask for us to worry about every little sort of jot and tittle going on in the school, and it would have helped them significantly. Eventually, we did get that request granted, but it was a full year they had to wait. So I think when we look at the difference in the kinds of asks, we look at the fact that we still maintain the prescriptive criteria for the large asks, because we don't want to grant a satellite to a school that isn't excelling and faithful to their charter and financially sound and all those things. But to add 25, 50 students to a grade or an additional ninth grade because the high school starts in 10th grade, these sorts of things, this policy not only gives us the flexibility to do that, but is more in line with the nature of the ask because it's small, and so we're requiring fewer things to grant that. So I'm very comfortable with that flexibility, and I was actually felt very kind of affirmed in that decision by how comfortable the members of the Law and Licensing Committee felt about that as well.
Just want to add one quick thing. Appreciate the dialogue on this as it relates to the small school expansion. I know Associate Director led out on this, but have looked at our different processes. And in this particular case, the collection in this process is the application, the policy, the procedures. And I do believe, you asked, how does staff feel? That was one of the questions. And I do think that we can apply consistent standards, which are absolutely important across the board, but also have some flexibility for the schools to do that. As we talk with all of the different stakeholders, with one of them being the LEAs and the schools, one thing anecdotally that we hear is, can we get a little relief? Can we get a little bit more flexibility in some certain areas? So I believe that this collection of this process, but it's a great dialogue, and it's a good reminder for us to apply consistent standards that align with the application, the policy, and the procedures, the process as a whole. I'm just throwing support as staff behind trying to balance those two things, applying the standards, but providing some flexibility. So,
Member Olson.
I just ask what those consistent standards are and why they're not listed in the policy. Because it says in the board rule, this is 552-5, it says an authorizer may approve a small expansion request in accordance with an authorizer's standards and established criteria. I don't have the foggiest idea what those established criteria are because they're not in the policy. And I'm just wondering if that's something that we should be telling schools about so they know whether they've got a shot at getting their request granted, or if it's enough for them to just believe that if it's for 50 to 100 students, would not necessitate a significant renovation, and is for no more than one additional grade, that they're going to be able to get it approved. So is there some additional standard that we're opposing here that's not in the policy when you refer to consistent standards? That's what troubles me. I love the idea of discretion. I think that's great, but unless we're just going to automatically approve them if they meet the only requirements that are listed in the policy, which is those three things that I just read, then I don't know. It concerns me. I think we've got a bit of a deficiency there.
Response? Would you
yeah,
like to?
could you pull up the application again as part of the process? Thanks, Marie. So I find that the little tool on the bottom is being helpful and supportive in this. It's not very prescriptive. I'll admit that it's not prescriptive, but it does provide that checkbox opportunity to go through, in particular, some USBE board rule and standards and those things, and other ones that we have collected with. So for me, that tool, as I reviewed this as part of the process, because if you're, the or there establishes that if you're underneath, I have to put my glasses on to see, if you're underneath a corrective action plan, right, that particular box checked in that case is very telling, right? That's very, very concerning, right? So I think that provides some flexibility, but also some standards, and they're consistently applied. So to me, that particular area helped.
Yes, Vice Chair Phillips.
Well, and to kind of, I think, at least in my opinion, from my perspective, to directly address your concerns, Member Olson, there aren't very many requirements for a small expansion. It's not prescriptive. The law and licensing members didn't want it to be prescriptive. So we may decide that a school who's asking for this little tiny ask and is under a corrective action plan, we actually, our original proposal was to keep the disqualifications there because we wondered about that ourselves. We certainly have them for the satellites and the small expansions. Part of the reason we kept them there is because that's something that the USBE committees have always wanted too. But as we were part of that discussion and as questions were asked and answered in that committee meeting, what became clear is that the committee members didn't necessarily think it was always the right thing to do on a small expansion ask to deny because of the cap. Again, where it might actually improve a school's ability to serve its community, or they wanted us to have the discretion to consider whether the ask was inappropriate given their status, whatever it might be. And they wanted the bar to be very low on granting these. They wanted it to still remain rather high for satellites and large expansions, but didn't think it was necessary to have much of a gate and criteria for the small asks. So you're right in noting kind of a dearth of criteria. It's more the context and allowing us to decide, and it probably is a stance that is one in which we're more likely to grant simply because it was asked than not, though we still have the opportunity to say, your ask doesn't really go along with, your context is concerning to us, and your ask doesn't, and your justification for it doesn't ring true to us, doesn't justify it, given your context. So I do think the default position that we were persuaded, in fact, the Law and Licensing Committee said, bring us back a new process once we've changed rule, because we would like this to be more flexible. So we're responding to them and doing that. Their stance was that, you know, that you would almost have to have not just a disqualification, but a lack of justification altogether for not granting the small expansion. I'm just giving you the context that we're operating under. So I think, you know, it's better to just admit that the criteria is, it's a low bar to get this granted, and that doesn't seem to be bothering anybody at the USBE, who is in fact, you know, distributing the money for that greater ask. So we thought, you know, our having the flexibility to even consider a school on a cap or a school that's had a little trouble here and there, gives us the discretion we need, with the understanding that in general, we will probably be granting these small requests.
Okay. Additional discussion. So I might ask even what would prohibit us from approving the small expansion? What would prohibit us? We've been talking about why we would approve. What would prohibit us?
I could imagine a request for a school, for example, that was on probation, and the ask was unrelated to correcting the probation, and we had serious and deep concerns that the school was not going to get themselves off of probation, for example. That would be a scenario in which I would be opposed to a small expansion request.
So I'm thinking that's maybe what Member Olson is saying is, should we be a little more clear? Don't even ask us if you're in this kind of a situation.
I would say, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, that's all right.
I would say no, we should not, because I also can imagine a scenario in which a school on probation would come to us with an ask that is related to their issues, whatever they might be, and a small expansion would help them. And so I would want the ability to look at what the request was and see, in our opinion, which I think we're all pretty capable of evaluating, does this request make sense? And in general, yes, we would like to grant these because it is a small ask. But there are circumstances in which we would like to say no, most of which would fall under something on this list, but these are not automatic no's.
Which I think that's Member Cisneros' point, is how will individuals know if we're being consistent? How do we create a consistent, because there's a lot of qualitative kind of room to change. There's a lot of gray area that we're allowing to. If we just say we're going to approve small expansions at this number, we are. And if we say, well, we might, but we might not, puts us in a less defensible kind of a waffling position that we could be inconsistent.
To me, that shaded gray area still provides the information on the application itself with additional narrative and additional stories. It could persuade either way, but it has some objectivity to it. So that's where I thought that the application of kind of consistent standards here, but then still having the flexibility. So just wanted to bring that up. Thank you, Chair Bowles.
Thanks. Additional discussion, go ahead.
My only other comment is that I think at this point we've spent way more time discussing this than I would like to spend on the average small expansion request.
And maybe so. That helps us to get to a good place, though, right? If we establish the criteria. Member Cisneros.
I'll probably ultimately end up voting in favor, but not without stating, I think we keep saying these are really small, negligible asks. I'm not comfortable making that a blanket statement. Adding a ninth grade is not a little ask. It's not. And yet adding a ninth grade could technically fall under this. I think there are some times when we're saying, oh, it's just this little tiny baby ask, isn't necessarily true just because it's a small expansion. It could have very significant ramifications immediately and down the road. I also think, and I expressed it the last time that this came up, are we going to have schools who learn how to work the system? I'll just come ask for baby after baby after baby after baby, and eventually I got my large. So I just want to tread lightly in making broad sweeping generalizations without any kind of consistent consideration about the decisions we're making, because in this meeting we've made some blanket statement that these are teeny changes. I also, although I fully support that it's USBE's ultimate decision for what happens with public education in the state, so I will make that very clear, we also have the right to create our own authorizing process. And we can be more prescriptive than USBE if we so choose. So I don't want to just say, well, because USBE says we have to be more flexible, I don't want to fall into that trap either. Like I said, I'll probably ultimately vote in favor, but not without that on the record.
I have one more.
AG Olson, you have something, and then back to Member
Just
Smith.
would like to make a comment, and I have to admit I've not read through this policy to know exactly what it says, but listening to the discussion, if the intent is to use the shaded area as a possible reason to not approve the application, you should have that in your policy, that you have that ability to not approve the application, considering those issues, to give you a chance. And it may be that you pull them in and you have the discussion and you still approve it. But I think the policy should recognize that
That these are considerations.
that those considerations, after you've reviewed it, that could be reason to deny the application.
Sure. Let me go to Member Smith first, and then Ms. Stephenson after that. Go ahead.
To address that, I would say that I think the area in the shaded box is a pretty clear alert to a school that if you are not in the no concerns section, you are in the other section, which is a concern, right? In fact, I would suggest that maybe we would want to have a little checkbox that says other, right? Because we could have other concerns that would be cause for denial. I don't know what they are right now on the top of my head, but it could be something. So that's point one. Point two was to Member Cisneros' point about repeated baby steps can be big steps. Sooner or later, if you're adding and adding and adding and adding, you are going to have to expand your facility, or you're going to have, you're going to end up with most likely a facility problem. But on online schools, obviously that would be a different case. I would suggest that we might want to consider adding language to prevent a scenario like that. Like, we haven't approved an expansion request in the last X amount of time, as a possible concern, right? Like, if you came back and asked for a second one, are we going to administratively deny you? I don't want to do that, right? Because maybe we do want to approve it, but also, are we going to be able to add and add and add and add? I would also like it clear that we can reject a request just because we feel like that might be what's happening.
Ms. Stephenson, you wanted to comment?
I was just going to add to Member Cisneros' point that the committee did express that as well, that while this was their recommendation, that, we certainly could have more restrictive components in place. And, if that was the direction the board wanted to go, perhaps staff could bring back, 3 different options at our next meeting, or work with the authorizing committee, or something at that point to give some different options on what this could look like if the board is not comfortable with what's being presented today.
Okay, so we could ask for some further look at this policy and kind of flesh out some of the comments that you've heard today. Currently, we still have a motion on the floor around the policy. So if we would like them to bring something back, we would first need to defeat that motion and then maybe give that direction to staff to look at that. Vice Chair Phillips?
I'm wondering if Oops, there we go. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be wise, because I do like the addition of kind of a warning against substituting a legitimate request for a large expansion for tiny, small expansions. I certainly don't want the system to be manipulated. I also think our staff and we are wise enough to recognize that and call a school out when they're doing that, even if we adopted these policies. But I like the idea of putting language in, maybe even making it clear that this could be, not necessarily isn't immediate grounds for denial, but that it could be if we don't think that, or just that it could be if we deem it sufficient. But I would maybe rather than fail this motion, I wonder if we shouldn't adopt it so we have a full procedure on the books that our charter world can actually utilize, but with the directive to staff that they bring us back a sort of an adjusted application and policy and procedure that reflects maybe some of our concerns, but preserves also the things that we want preserved.
So we have approved the application. I'm going to ask, is there a timeline? Have we asked law and licensing? We've said we would bring it back by a specific time. Is there a deadline to us returning an approved policy?
They have not given us a timeline. I believe per what our typical process has been, we would want to have everything resolved so that we could receive applications by July of next year, which would put us needing to have this, ready to go to law and licensing by like April, essentially at the latest. And so I think we do have some time that we could spend on this if needed.
Okay, so I've heard, I think, fairly unanimously among this group that you would like to have some additional language come back. The question about whether you'll pass the policy as it stands currently is up to the board, and I'll call for a vote relative to that motion. Member Smith, you have what?
I would just like to point out that it puts us in a very awkward position to have an updated application without updating the policy to reflect that. So I think that Vice Chair Phillips' suggestion that we approve this policy with the direction to refine it is more, it puts us administratively in a better position than to try to maintain the previous policy with an updated application.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call for a vote on the motion, which the motion is to approve the policy, right? Okay, so let's first vote on that motion, and it's up to the board to choose how you would like to do. All those in favor of approving this the motion to approve the new policy, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, so we have approved a new policy, application and policy, with direction now to clarify those criteria for us that would preclude someone from the criteria that we would consider relative to approving a small expansion. And maybe in our February meeting, we know January will be busy, but maybe in our February meeting, we direct staff to bring us back some additional language. Now, do we need to take another motion? And that's the procedure? All right. So do I have a motion relative to that procedure?
Similar to our action on the policy, I would like to move that we adopt the proposed changes to the small expansion procedure with directive to staff to consider adjustments that would be necessary in light of a revised policy.
Thank you. So that adds that into the motion, both. A second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Member Bassett, so initial motion from Member Smith, second from Member Bassett. Any additional discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve the procedure as it's been presented to us with the direction to come back in February with some criteria that could be attached that we would consider as we approve in the future small expansions. All those in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. All right, that motion passes. Yeah, Member Smith, go ahead. Well, we've got those three pieces done with that. Thank you.
So I just wonder, do we need to administratively direct staff to also accommodate any
Can we just say, look at the application at the same time as you do those and bring that whole package for us to consider? But we have taken a position, and you've heard the discussion from the board and the thoughts that the board members have. Thank you so much. Vice Chair Phillips has agreed to help us talk through some discussion of the MOU that we really would like to, in partnership with USPE leadership, to put together this MOU we've talked about for some time, and we keep waiting because there's so much going on. We are scheduled to adjourn for lunch at 11:30, but I'm going to ask if you all will continue with us for a little bit beyond the 11:30 time, so Vice Chair Phillips has some time to have the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate Chair Bowles has asked me to discuss with you the high-level priorities pertaining to SCSB's MOU with the Utah State Board of Education. And in order to do that, and in order to get direction from this board, I'd like to give sort of some context and then let you know the direction that we're heading in as leadership, talking with USBE leadership and staff to do this, and our staff supporting us in this effort. And one of the reasons that it's important that we talk about this now is because, we have a legislative session looming. We have promised certain legislators who have both said in a threatening and a supportive way, get this fixed or we will, right? And we have, in addition, a very a leadership group at the USBE that's very amenable to getting this done in a productive way. And I'd like to think that Brian and I are very amenable as well. We certainly have tried to be. So in a legislative audit of 2021, there was an examination of the overall governance and accountability structure of charter schools in Utah, and this audit sought to provide recommendations to clarify the roles of state institutions that authorize or oversee charter schools. And the audit did raise the following questions. Are the roles and responsibilities of the USB and SCSB over charter schools clear enough to provide charter accountability? Are the policies and practices of charter school authorities in Utah sufficient to provide oversight and support to charter schools? Are there enough requirements of local governing boards to ensure their role in overseeing the performance of the charters that they govern? There were other questions, but I think those are salient to the discussion. And one of the things that they found, and this is in a published audit, was that governance roles are unclear between the USBE and the SCSB. The state-level governance and oversight is unclear because of shared responsibilities in part. Both boards' statutory roles mention similar responsibilities, causing confusion over which body oversees charter schools at certain levels and in certain categories. The legislature clarified some practices of the SCSB and charter schools in 2020. A couple bills were passed that did help with that. However, the governance roles of these two boards has not been addressed fully. And because of this circumstance, charter school accountability, charter school support, charter school oversight and monitoring is confusing and should be clarified and improved. Essentially, the USBE, as you know, has constitutional authority over public education. The SCSB is the authorizer of most of the schools in Utah that are charter schools. The vast majority, I think 95% was the last percent we looked at, and has some oversight duties for those charter schools in Utah that they authorize, as well as some technical support responsibilities for all charter schools that are authorized in Utah statutorily. The SCSB is not designated as a division of the USBE. That's not how we're defined in statute, nor is it designated as an independent entity either that has complete oversight over charter schools in the public education system. So we're a little bit of a limbo, a very unique entity. And that has led to some confusion on our part and the USBE's part. And no malicious intent there, just plain old regular confusion between well-meaning groups. And it's also resulted in confusion among LEAs, charter LEAs, and staff at the USBE and SCSB as to who has which authority over charter schools or who has which responsibility. And a lot of this was discovered by vast surveys and interviews that the audit did among stakeholders. And this is, again, shared by members of board, of charter school boards and of charter school leaders and charter school stakeholders in general. They're not even sure sometimes who to talk to or who to bring an issue to. They don't know who has responsibility over that. So this has resulted in an ill-defined boundary between who oversees charter schools in the public education system. Now, the USBE, as you know, is an elected 15-member board that is constitutionally charged with overseeing public education. We are a 7-member governor-appointed board created in 2004, as has been noted 20 years ago, to be the primary authorizer of most of the state's charter schools. Due to the differences in governance structure and appointment, the SCSB does not answer to the USBE, but as such, it is difficult to determine then which body is responsible for which aspects of oversight. The USB's role in overseeing all public schools in Utah is probably paramount, and we have to remember that. And our role of actually authorizing schools within that system of public school education. And so the USBE is basically the ultimate governing board over all those types of schools. So we're authorizing schools that they are the primary authority over. So where do we fit in? That's our role, right? So most of the responsibilities for the SCSB are actually found in board rule, but because we're not designated as a division of USBE or as an independent agency, the board rules governing the SCSB have actually been initiated by legislation. We know that there's some changes coming to that in this legislative session, but they're modest in regard to clarifying our roles. So although that both the responsibilities of the SCSB and the USB have specific language in both code and board rule, the auditors in 2021, the legislative auditors, found that the two boards were very confused about their roles in spite of that language. And we have different roles related to the monitoring and oversight of charter school funds, which also results in unclear expectations and practices. So for instance, the SCSB has no power to distribute funds. We don't get funds for public schools, nor do we have power to withhold funds or to ask for reimbursement. But we are charged with kind of general oversight of financial health. Looking at that as a red flag, supporting schools maybe with technical assistance and improving their operations in that regard. So you can see how this can become a little bit confusing. Another example would be that statute establishes that the SCSB has the authority to approve and remove an executive director with the consent of the state superintendent. We're talking about our own executive director. This is not a foreshadowing, Paul, in any way, shape, or form. However, the executive director is accountable to the SCSB board members and does not answer to the USBE or to the superintendent. So, and you should know that in this process of hiring a new director, we were in close contact with the superintendent, Brian and I, and ensured that this statute was followed. But it's just a kind of a weird little twisted organic way of doing things that just adds to the confusion about who's in charge of what. And another area of concern is data sharing between the two boards and their staff. Much of that has largely been addressed simply by the goodwill of parties on both sides of this question, our good staff at the SCSB and the good staff at the USBE, but it's still not clear. The USBE is the primary collector of all LEA level data, and the SCSB does not collect that data, but can't do any of its statutory obligations, maybe perhaps with the exception of what we do with governing boards, without that data. If it's unclear if the SCSB is a division of the USB or to what extent we are, the issue of data sharing becomes muddied. There was also a task force about 5 years before this legislative audit went for a full year, and it was a task force of 2016, and it recommended that the two boards create a memorandum of understanding or an MOU to internally clarify the roles of employees, oversight, shared and independent responsibilities, and so on. The legislative audit, some handful of years later, recommended that same solution, that there be an MOU established to internally clarify the roles of the two boards and of their staff relative to charter schools. Some of the other recommendations for resolving the confusion of overlap were rather unhelpful. One of them was to designate the SCSB as a hybrid LEA, which would put us, which would not only sort of destroy the uniqueness of each charter, but it would also put us in a position to need an administrative support staff about the size of Alpine School District. Or establishing the SCSB as an independent government entity without ties to the USPE. And we not only had grave sort of constitutional concerns about that latter one, but also, but even so, we did explore, because we were urged by certain legislators to do that, the possibility of becoming an independent government entity. And we did that. We explored this with the governor's office and the Division of Finance and several legislators over the course of a year. And it was extremely difficult and unprecedented. Yeah, it was impossible, as a matter of fact. And we gave up on that effort and felt it wasn't productive, and it wasn't in our best interest or charter school's best interest or public education's best interest. So these efforts have been underway now to try to resolve this for well over 8 years. We have yet to reach terms for an MOU between our USPE board and even after the publishing of the legislative audit, we're here now on the cusp of 2024, and we do not have an MOU. So, and I'd like to suggest that I'd like to take some responsibility for that as a board, not necessarily personally, but our SCSB board held up in some regard this MOU for a number of years because of our insistence on a type of fiscal autonomy that simply is not legal in our present position. There's really no other way for me to say it. And so what I'm suggesting is that philosophically, what we are looking at is compliance with all those aspects that are legally required of us as an institution who receives money as other education entities do through the USPE as a pass-through, and is subject to all procurement. And where we sit, we're not just subject to the regular procurement that policies of public monies, of expenditures of public monies, but we are also part of the USBE's audit, financial audit. So those members of the USBE's financial department actually have to account to the federal government and to the state government for our money. Knowing that, what we're looking at is having an opportunity, I think, is because that has been a sticking point, to comply with all the requirements that relationship implies, but to have autonomy in the decision making. That is to say, I'll get to that here in a second, but the idea being that we understand our fiscal position, and statute requires the Board of Education to approve our budget after we approve it, but that beyond that, we have autonomy in decision-making within the USB or the SCSB. So these are my recommendations based on my understanding of this process. And I was involved in it tangentially when Delana was our board chair. And Kristen was our board chair as well. They both worked on this. Brian and I have been working on it for a bit, but part of that was a dead end in terms of becoming an independent entity, which we felt that we ought to explore because of the audit. And we were pushed to explore it because of the audit. But have learned so much in that process about what is not productive and where we can have autonomy and where we can't. And so we really just want this clarified. So what we are suggesting today, and we would love to have your guidance as we go to make what we hope, and what I've told Vice Superintendent Jones, I want to be so laudable and productive and feasible that it becomes the template for any other states looking to establish a really productive relationship with their SEA, who are authorizing boards similar to ours. I want ours to be the example that these other states look to. But what we're looking at is, in order to clarify first of all, clarifying the responsibilities of the SCSB as an authorizer versus the USBE as as the board tasked with the general supervision of education, and specifically looking at our tasks as being a kind of general monitoring of the operational health of the school, which is primarily done in our 5-year reviews. And fidelity to the charter agreement. That's something by which we are entirely bound in this bilateral agreement with these governing boards of these 501c3s typically. And the USBE has no part in that agreement. Of course, in another sense, they're going to then, because of our agreement with these charter schools, they're going to distribute monies for public education. So they do have a relationship with the schools at that point, which becomes paramount in many ways in terms of compliance, distribution of funds, request for reimbursement, Office of Civil Rights complaints, and so on, which are very much a part of the USBE's departments. But we, in looking at the fidelity to the charter agreement, there are two parts in particular that we, apart from the USBE, have almost full oversight of, and that would be essentially full oversight over the appropriate operation of the governing boards. These are the individuals. This is the group with whom we have our bilateral agreement, and these are not elected officials. In some cases, there's a parent elected representative or a staff elected representative, but for the most, certainly not elected the way a district LEA constitutes its board. And so, the only oversight that's meaningful that can be given to these boards is by us because of our bilateral agreement. So looking at that very clearly as one of our major responsibilities in oversight. And of course, that is tied to the fidelity to the charter agreement. The other thing that is tied to the fidelity to the charter agreement, which could range anywhere from a discussion of the delivery of education, how that's delivered, whether there's an online school or a brick and mortar school or what have you that we have signed an agreement with them for, but also specifically oversight of the education performance measures that are unique to each charter that we have agreed to care about. So if there's a school for non-traditional students, maybe what we've agreed to care about in authorizing that school is graduation rates, credit recovery, attendance, right? That is different from the USBE's concern, which they will have a concern for every school in the public system of minimum standards and other things that they have established as the supervisor with a capital S of all of the public education system in our state, which is a responsibility and an obligation and a privilege which they exclusively hold in our Constitution. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at the clarification of the status of the SCSB staff with respect to the USBE. In other words, in what ways are our employees USBE employees? I mean, we do share the same HR. Payroll comes through the same process. Brian and I are seeking and did seek the confirmation, the approval of the state superintendent per statute to be able to hire a new director. So it's not that we're not willing to comply with whatever statute requires of us. There are processes, administrative processes that underlie some of the meaning of those statutes that we have to actually explore so that it's clear to us and clear to the USBE. I think we can live with just about anything if we know what it is, right? And our staff can kind of function clearly under that umbrella, and so can the SCSB staff. And I would say that probably some of the most sort of abrasive interactions related to trying to understand roles have occurred because of this misunderstanding. So I don't think, and what we found, and Brian and I got an amazing education in hiring an executive director about some of this HR stuff. What we learned is that it's quite easily resolved with understanding from each party. And so putting that in an MOU, I think, is going to be extremely important. In what ways are our employees legally, fiscally, in terms of the State Division of Finance, considered employees of the USBE? What does that actually mean? Where does that have to be considered the category of describing our employees? And in what other ways, outside of a very strict group of sort of actions, criteria, and understanding, are they our employees? Meaning our board's employees, managed by our executive director. We need to clarify the process of data sharing was another priority we felt for the MOU. Clarifying areas of overlap, communication, and decision-making. Sometimes the confusion has come because the USBE has expected charter school staff to do something, and charter school staff has expected the USBE to do it. So whose responsibilities in specific kinds of circumstances? And these are big categories. They're not usually minutiae, some minutia. It's basically, pretty broad and could be clarified. One of the areas where we've tried to clarify it recently, as an example, would be in complaints that come from specific charters about, if it's about a licensed individual, that's easy. That goes to UPAC, right? Nobody worries about it. If it's about, a governing board, that should come to us, right? It really should. If it's about somebody's not receiving special education services the way that individual parent wants their child to be receiving it, or something's going wrong there, it's pretty clear that it goes to the special education department. But there are a lot of kind of gray areas there that just need to be sorted. And recently our staff has worked with USBE staff to try to sort that. And it's been successful. So my point being that an MOU that clarifies these sorts of things can be successful, because we've already done it kind of in an informal way, and it's already showing some success. And then clarify the financial relationship between the USBE and SCSB. This has been, as I mentioned before, one of the sticking points. And I do believe that we as a board and as a staff and as a leadership team are in a better position. I'm going to say this in a very conceding way. I hope all USBE members are hearing this. To concede, okay, I'm using that word on purpose, to concede that our financial autonomy is limited. So where is the autonomy? Where is it not? And what are we able legally, ethically, and administratively to do with our autonomy? So I think that we also want to suggest and hear what this board has to say. Brian and I think that this MOU, and I've floated this idea, and I want to say, Vice Superintendent Stallings, I think I maybe have even floated it by you at some point, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this MOU may best be situated, rather than in some kind of a contract or agreement, in USBE rule, where it can be modified from time to time, and maybe the initial rule with USBE support through law and licensing, I would suggest, may be described as requiring any kind of change might be in the rule could actually include the idea that changes would require either the collaboration or the consent of both boards to enact changes to initial language, or the rule may set up an appropriate process for such changes. I'm going to leave that to the experts. I'm sort of looking at Angie over there. So as you've heard that kind of contextual discussion, but then also the priorities that Brian and I feel we need to look at in the MOU so that our staff can function most efficiently, so that our relationship with the USBE is really clear and really good and really productive for our charter schools, for public education in general. We would like your feedback, because we're going into these negotiations with board leadership, with USBE board leadership in earnest to try to get this done.
Those who have comments, you can see why this is not an easy process. Yeah, there's a lot to it.
First thing I would like to First thing I'd like to say is how grateful I am for the heroic amounts of work that you have done on this. I mean, this has been a problem since this board was established, right? And it's a very tricky, thorny problem, and no one blames anyone that it's taken 20 years to try to resolve it. And I think it is almost superhuman that you are very close to, I think, a good resolution. I'm very happy with, I understand the reasons behind all of the proposed changes that you're looking at. And I think in general, speaking broadly, they make a lot of sense. I wanted to mention that even now, occasionally, I wake up from a nightmare about AISU. You've obliquely addressed the underlying problem with that, which resolves finances. And I understand the concept of conceding to make sure that something like that never happens again.
Yeah.
But the one thing I really want to make sure of is that something like that never happens again.
Yeah. Right. Member Olson.
Yeah, I echo the comment of gratitude for the fact that you've been handling this. It's a big load. I agree with the areas of clarity that you're trying to explore, and I also agree with the idea, if possible, to have this in a board rule. It seems odd to me for USBE and SCSB to enter into a contract that's not really governed, well, that's going to end up being governed by contract law and is going to be outside of the control going forward of either side unless there's a further amendment or further agreement, and also be outside of the control of the legislature if they want to change the law. So unless our goal is to go change the law, and I understand you to be saying that that's not really our goal, we operate within a statutory framework, then it seems that the best way to once this is hammered out, the best way to codify it is to just put it in a USBE rule, and that way USBE can change it from time to time, and I imagine they'll seek our input when they decide to do that, and that just seems like the best way going forward. But I applaud you for everything you're doing. It all sounds great to me.
Thank you so much. Others? Other comments? Thank you. Oh, so Vice Chair Phillips, thank you for helping to gather all that together, and continue, and maybe we'll finish drafting language that we can share with USBE as the next step, and then start to move forward that process, and you can see that language so you can look at it and give comment and see if we've left out anything or if there are things. Yeah, please.
You know, I'd feel a ton better if, and Chair, I'm going to let you comment on this, and maybe our staff or Vice Superintendent Stallings could chime in here, our AAG Olson. I would feel a lot better having some kind of a vote that authorizes your leadership to go and negotiate this with the USBE, because otherwise we're doing it just kind of based on a discussion. Yeah, it sounds good, go ahead. But you know, this is a big deal. And in the past, even though I fully agree with you, it has no place in a contract, and I dismissed that as I got into the weeds on it. But having the support of our board behind this effort, I think not only would speak very strongly to the USBE leadership and board members about our seriousness about getting this done, but it would also empower us to go on your behalf and reflect this in some kind of a proposal.
I'm thinking this board might want to look at some of that language as well, too, as it kind of comes to that point. AAG Olson.
I don't know if you're asking my thoughts on that, but I don't know if you're suggesting to have one person approve it for the board. I think it needs to come back to the board to, as a body, to.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
I'd recommend that way.
I'm suggesting that with your sort of blessing as a board for us to go into this, knowing that these are the priorities. We've given the broad parameters of what our priorities are as we go in to negotiating and discussion. And it would be much as I guess, you know, as the chair of the legislative committee, when after I get your vote, which I did this year already, to be and Brian and I both, and on our legislative committee in general, which includes member Spiker. We go in then to those meetings, those committee meetings and other things, really feeling like we have the support of the board. So although we would never approve anything or give it I think what it'll be more like is giving it a recommendation as we send it to the USB, right? I guess what I would like is for you to give us approval for the priorities that as they have been presented today. I think that would be, if I'm going to be specific, that would be, and we can come back and ask the board if new priorities come up. And I think that's appropriate because we don't want this to be a memorandum that reflects, Chair Bowles' view and my view. We want it to be the board's view. And that's why we brought the priorities today before we go into sort of some of these really sort of nitty gritty discussions. So.
Well, when you're asking for priorities, that kind of changes what I was going to say. But I think as chair and vice chair, I don't know that you need authority from this board to carry that weight to speak to the USBE. I think you've got that inherent in the positions that you have. Now, if you want to go with the board's approval to focus on those parts of it, maybe that's something different. But I think you've got that inherent. I don't think you need a vote from this body to do that, unless you would like to do that.
How about if we follow this process? We will continue to work and coordinate with USBE leadership, and then when we have language at a place we would like you to react to it, we'll bring it back to this board and let you look at the specifics of the language and be able to react to that and give approval. And obviously, the state board has got to vote on that, and their leadership and others have. It's a two-way understanding, so we'll have to do that as we go along. So if you're all right with that, how about if we continue conversations, which we honestly are already in, but as we have language, we'll come back. Acceptable? All right. So Vice Chair Phillips, thank you for really doing the heavy lifting and making this happen. We think there's no better time than right now to move forward. So we'll continue. All right. With that, we're a little bit behind, just 30 minutes. That's not too bad. Could be hours, right? So this is not too bad, and we've had some really good discussion. Thank you so much for doing that. So a couple of little instructions as we adjourn for lunch and a game, and then we'll come back to this room after that. So these instructions, knowing that we'll be back here in an hour or so. Those of you who brought a favorite thing should take that with you. We'll go downstairs to room 73 where we'll have a nice lunch together, and it says holiday game. So I suspect that's part of the favorite things, right? All right. The boardroom is going to be set up for our afternoon while we're downstairs. So you should take everything with you, and we'll just line the walls downstairs.
Can I ask if you want to take your
Computer and things like that, so that they can get the room ready.
Can I just ask a question that's
Yeah.
housekeeping?
Of course.
And I'm going to direct this actually at Vice Superintendent Stallings. I just noticed that this room might be double booked, so I'm just alerting the USBE to that. I think the reports and requirements meeting was, which is a wonderful task force looking at ways of improving all of our lives who are involved in public education. No, it is? Okay, very good. Then it's a non-issue.
All right. Couple other things. Just real quick reminder, because when we come back, we are going to do other things. To remind you that our next board meeting is January 18th, which is the third Thursday, to remember that. And that we have, thanks to our charter office team, have sent us applications to read, and so that we're prepared for January. We'll be considering new applications also. And I have Deputy Superintendent Stallings here, but inside of this, just this is our year to welcome Dr. Kramer to our group. And since he's already visited Tooele, I don't know if he went as far as Grantsville, but these are from Grantsville and connects to our Great Salt Lake. And it is not a box of brine flies. It is instead, though, something representing our lake and to say welcome to Utah. And so to say thank you to all of you for this really very good year. I still have a favorite thing too, but this is just to say thank you for the year.
Can we open it together?
You may if you choose.
Can't take this.
I'm at it. Get it. Thank you, Chair Bowles. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Great appreciation.
Oh, that's pretty.
I just love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I too have a gift.
Better than
It's better
Brian
if it's
Ply.
given in private.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better than
It's sometimes that way.
All right.
Lunch is
You're welcome.
Thank
Off to lunch then, everyone.